Welcome to Acting for a Cause presents The Great Gatsby. Today, we are reading this play in benefit of AMFAR, a very important nonprofit that is dedicated to curing AIDS. This reading would not have been possible without the support of people in the description of the video, and most importantly, Dolce & Gabbana, which sponsored us by providing outfits for the reading, as well as donating to the charity. Thank you very much.
Chapter 1. Exterior, East Egg, in the middle of the night. Nick Carraway drives past the mansions of the wealthy East Egg and the Sands Point end of the Port Washington Peninsula. The streets are lit only by the headlights on his Model T Ford.
In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. And so it came about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and had a sort of moral attention forever. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this story, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. After various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22.
Suddenly, a man's voice interrupts our narrator.
How do you get to West Egg Village?
I lived at West Egg, the less fashionable of the two unusual formations of land. Two enormous eggs, identical in contour, 20 miles from the city, jut out into the Long Island Sound. My house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the Sound, and squeezed between two huge places that rented for $12,000 or $15,000 a season. The house on my right was a colossal affair by any standard. It was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side and a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was Gatsby's mansion. Or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. Across the Courtesy Bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water. The history of the summer really begins on the evening I drove over there to have dinner with the Tom Buchanans. Daisy was my second cousin once removed, and I'd known Tom in college. And just after the war, I spent 2 days with him in Chicago. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, had been one of the most powerful ends that ever played football at New Haven. A national figure in a way. One of those men who reach such an acute limited excellence at 21 that everything afterward savors of anticlimax.
Exterior, Buchanan Mansion, porch, day. A warm, windy evening in the East Egg, with a cheerful red and white Georgian colonial mansion overlooking the bay.
Tom and I were in the same senior society, and while we were never intimate, I always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to like him with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own.
Shakespeare!
Foot!
I've got a nice place here.
You do?
It
It's...
belonged to Domain, the oil man. We'll go inside.
Interior, hallway into sunroom, day. A high hallway into a bright, rosy-colored space. A breeze blows through the room. Blue curtains like pale flags, twisting them up toward the frosted wedding cake of the ceiling and then rippled over the wine-colored rug, making shadow on it as wind does on the sea. Tom shuts the windows. 2 women lie languidly in white dresses. The blonde with a raised chin is Jordan Baker, and the dark-haired woman is Daisy Buchanan, Tom's wife.
Nick, I'm paralyzed with happiness. Have you met Miss Jordan Baker? Do they miss me in Chicago?
The whole town is desolate, and there's a persistent wail all night along the North Shore.
How gorgeous. Let's go back, Tom. Tomorrow. Have you seen the baby? You ought to see her. She's
So what are you doing, Nick?
I'm a bond man.
Who with?
I told him.
Never heard of them.
I'm stiff.
How you ever getting anything done is beyond me.
You live in West Egg. I know somebody there.
Well, I don't know a single person.
You must know Gatsby.
Gatsby? What Gatsby?
We ought to plan something.
All right. What do we plan? What do people plan? Look, I heard it. You did it, Tom. I know you didn't mean to, but you did do it. That's what I get for marrying a brute of a man. A great big hulking
I hate
physical...
that word hulking, even in kidding.
Hulking.
Civilization's going to pieces. Hey, I've gotten to be a terrible pessimist about things. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by this man Goddard?
Why, no.
Well, it's a fine book, and everybody ought to read it. The idea is if we don't look out, the white race will be utterly submerged. It's all scientific stuff. It's been proved.
Tom's getting very profound. He reads deep books with long words in them. What was that word we...
Well, these books are all very scientific. This fellow has worked out the whole thing. You see, it's up to us, who are the dominant race, to watch out, or these other races, they will have control of other things.
Did you notice that the butler's nose is silver? That's because he used to have a silver service. Polishing morning till night affected his nose so badly, he finally had to give up his position and become a butler. It's a family secret. I love to see you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose. An absolute rose, doesn't he? An absolute rose.
This was untrue. I'm not even faintly like a rose, but a stirring warmth flowed from her as if her heart was trying to come out to you, concealed in one of those breathless, thrilling words.
A phone rings. Tom goes to answer it.
This Mr. Gatsby you spoke of, he's my neighbor.
Don't talk. I want to hear what happens.
Is something happening?
You mean to say you don't know? I thought everybody knew.
I don't.
Why, Tom has got some woman in New York.
Got some woman. She might have the decency not to telephone him at dinner time, don't you think?
If it's late enough after dinner, I want to take you down to the stables.
The horses, needless to say, were not mentioned again.
There's a shift in the environment. Nick looks out the window and sees the velvet dusk.
We don't know each other very well, Nick, even if we are cousins. You didn't come to my wedding.
I wasn't back from the war.
That's true. Well, I've had a very bad time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything. It'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things. Well, our daughter was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. I woke up out of the ether with an utterly abandoned feeling and asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and wept. All right, I said. I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool.
Looks like Tom and Jordan are enjoying the Saturday Evening Post.
Jordan's going to play in the tournament over at Westchester.
Oh, you're Jordan Baker, the golf champion. I've read about you in sporting magazines.
Good night. Wake me at 8, won't you? Good night, Mr. Carraway. See you anon.
In fact, I think I'll arrange a marriage. Come over often, Nick, and I'll sort of fling you together. You know, lock you up accidentally in linen closets and push you out to sea in a boat and all that sort of a thing.
Good night. I haven't heard a word.
Well, I'd better head out too.
Wait, I forgot to ask you something, and it's important. We heard you were engaged to a girl out west.
That's right, we heard you were engaged.
That's libel. I'm too poor.
But we heard it. We heard it from 3 people, so it must be true.
Of course I knew what they were referring to, but I wasn't even vaguely engaged. The fact that gossip had published the bans was one of the reasons I had come east. As I arrived home, I saw that I was not alone. 50 feet away, a figure had emerged from the shadow of my neighbor's mansion and was standing with his hands in his pockets, regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested that it was Mr. Gatsby himself, come out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. I decided to call to him. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and as far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished. And I was alone again in the unquiet darkness.
Chapter 2. Exterior, in Tom's car. Valley of Ashes, daytime. Nick and Tom drive through the Valley of Ashes, passing an old, expired billboard of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg.
We're getting off. I want you to meet my girl.
Exterior, George's garage, daytime. The car screeches to a halt before a sign that reads, Repairs, George B. Wilson. Cars bought and sold.
Hello, Wilson, old man. How's business?
I can't complain. When are you going to sell me that car?
Next week. I've got my man working on it now.
Works pretty slow, doesn't she?
No, he doesn't. And if you feel that way about it, maybe I'd better sell it to somewhere else after all.
I don't mean that. I just meant...
A woman, faintly stout, carries herself sensuously into the room.
Get some chairs, why don't you, so somebody can sit down.
Oh, sure.
I want to see you. Get on the next train.
All right.
I'll meet you by the newsstand on the lower level.
Just as George Wilson emerges with 2 chairs from his office door, Tom and Nick are already headed out. Exterior, Wilson's garage. Tom and Nick walk back to the white coupe.
Terrible place, isn't it? Just awful. It does her good to get away.
Doesn't her husband object?
Wilson. He thinks she goes to see her sister in New York. He's so dumb he doesn't know he's alive.
So Tom Buchanan and his girl and I went up together to New York. Or not quite together, for Mrs. Wilson sat discreetly in another car. We soon slid out from the mass of the station into the glowing sunshine.
I want to get one of those dogs. I want to get one for the apartment. They're nice to have, a dog. How much is it?
That dog? $10.
Is it a boy or a girl?
That dog? That dog's a boy.
It's a bitch. Here's your money. Go and buy 10 more dogs with it.
Hold on. I have to leave you here.
No, you don't. Myrtle will be hurt if you don't come up to the apartment. Won't you, Myrtle?
Come on. I'll telephone my sister Catherine. She's said to be very beautiful by people who would not know.
Well, I'd like to, but...
Interior, Tom and Myrtle's apartment.
The apartment was on the top floor. A small living room, a small dining room, a small bedroom, and a bath. The living room was crowded to the doors. Tom brought out a bottle of whiskey from a locked bureau door. Now, I have been drunk just twice in my life, and the second time was that afternoon. So everything that happened has a dim, hazy cast over it. Sitting on Tom's lap, Myrtle called up several people on the telephone. After the first drink, Mrs. Wilson and I called each other by our first names, and company commenced to arrive at the apartment door. Myrtle's sister Catherine was a slender, worldly girl of about 30, with a solid, sticky bob of red hair and a complexion powdered milky white. She looked around so possessively at the furniture that I wondered if she lived here.
Do I live here? I live with a girlfriend at a hotel.
Mr. McKee was a pale, feminine man from the flat below. He had just shaved, for there was a white spot of lather on his cheekbone.
The esteemed Mr. Buchanan. And you must be Nick Carraway, the bondsman.
I used to be a bondsman, but now I'm in the artistic game.
His wife was shrill, languid, handsome, and horrible.
My husband has photographed me 127 times since we have been married. Oh, I like your dress. I think it's adorable.
Oh, it's just a crazy old thing. I just slip it on sometimes when I don't care what I look like.
Oh, but it looks wonderful on you, if you know what I mean. If Chester could only get you in that pose, I think he could make something of it.
I would change the light.
Oh, no, I wouldn't be changing the light. I think it's...
Shh! You McKees have something to drink.
Do you live down on Long Island too?
I live at West Egg.
Really? I was down there at a party about a month ago at a man named Gatsby's. Do you know him?
I live next door to him.
Well, they say he's a nephew or a cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm's. That's where all his money comes from.
Really?
I'm scared of him. I'd hate to have him get anything on me. Neither of them can stand the person they're married to. Can't stand them. What I say is, why go on living with them if they can't stand them? If I was them, I'd get a divorce and get married to each other right away.
Doesn't she like Wilson either?
I wish Wilson would get hit by some car.
Myrtle really ought to get away from her husband. They've been living over that garage for 11 years. You see, it's really his wife that's keeping them apart. She's a Catholic, and they don't believe in divorce.
Daisy was not a Catholic, and I was a little shocked at the elaborateness of the lie. It was 9 o'clock. Almost immediately afterward, I looked at my watch and found it was 10, and then midnight.
You have no right to say her name!
I do. I can say whatever I want.
I've told you not to talk about her. Ever!
Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. I'll say it whenever I want to. Daisy, Daisy.
Tom punches Myrtle.
Making a short, deft movement, Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. Bloody towels on the bathroom floor, a long broken wail of pain. The McKees and Catherine scolded and consoled. Then Mr. McKee turned and continued on out the door. Taking my hat from the chandelier, I followed him to the elevator.
Come to lunch someday.
Where?
Anywhere.
Before I knew it, I was standing beside his bed and he was sitting up between the sheets, clad in his underwear, with a great portfolio in his hands. Then, I was lying half asleep in the cold lower level of the Pennsylvania station, staring at the Morning Tribune and waiting for the 4 o'clock train.
Chapter 3. Exterior, Gatsby's mansion.
There was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight. The cars from New York are parked 5 deep in the drive. The bar is in full swing, and floating rounds of cocktails permeate the garden outside until the air is alive with chatter and laughter and casual innuendo and introductions forgotten on the spot and enthusiastic meetings between women who never knew each other's names. The party has begun. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who had actually been invited. People were not invited. They went there. As soon as I arrived, I made an attempt to find my host, but the 2 or 3 people of whom I asked his whereabouts stared at me in such an amazed way and denied so vehemently any knowledge of his movements that I slunk off in the direction of the cocktail table, the only place in the garden where a single man could linger without looking purposeless and alone. I was on my way to get roaring drunk from sheer embarrassment when...
Hello. I thought you might be here. I remembered you lived next door to... Let's get out. This is much too polite for me. Let's find the host.
The bar, where we glanced first, was crowded, but Gatsby was not there. On a chance, we tried an important-looking door and walked into a high Gothic library, paneled with carved English oak, and probably transported completely from some ruin overseas. A stout, middle-aged man with enormous owl-eyed spectacles was sitting somewhat drunk on the edge of a great table, staring with unsteady concentration at the shelves of books.
What do you think?
About what?
about that. As a matter of fact, you needn't bother to ascertain. I ascertained. They're real.
The books.
Absolutely real. Have pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice, durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real pages. Here, let me show you. See? It's a bona fide piece of printed matter. This fellow's a regular Belasco. It's a triumph. What thoroughness, what realism. Knew when to stop too. He didn't cut the pages. But what do you want? What do you expect? If one brick was removed, the whole library would be liable to collapse. Who brought you? Or did you just come? I was brought. Most people were brought. I was brought by a woman named Roosevelt. Mrs. Claude Roosevelt. Do you know her? I met her somewhere last night. I've been drunk for about a week now, and I thought it might be sober me up to sit in the library.
Has it?
A little bit, I think. I can't tell yet. I've only been here for like an hour. Did I tell you about the books? They're real.
You told us.
We shook hands with him gravely and went back outdoors. At a lull in the entertainment, a man looked at me and smiled.
Hey, your face is familiar. Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war?
Why, yes. Yes, I was in the 9th Machine Gun Battalion. I was in the 7th Infantry until June 1918. I knew I had seen you before.
I would love to just spend a day back at those wet, gray little villages in France. Evidently, I live in this vicinity, and I just bought this hydroplane. You see, I was going to try it out in the morning. Would you want to go with me? Come on, come with me. We're just going to go near the shore along the road.
Well, what time?
Any time that suits you best.
What's
Having
your...
a gay time now?
Much better. This is an unusual party for me. I haven't seen the host yet. I live over there. And this man, Gatsby, sent over his chauffeur with an invitation.
I'm Gatsby.
What?
Oh.
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon.
I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host.
He smiled, understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor.
Sir, Chicago is calling you on the wire.
If you want anything, just ask for it, old sport, okay? Excuse me. I'm gonna rejoin you later.
Oh, is he? Do you know?
He's just a man named Gatsby.
Yes, but where is he from, I mean? And what does he do?
Oh, no, you're started on the subject. Well, he told me once he was an Oxford man. However, I don't believe it.
Well, why not?
I don't know. I just don't think he went there. Anyhow, he gives large parties, and I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy.
I beg your pardon, Miss Baker. I beg your pardon, but Mr. Gatsby would like to speak to you. Alone?
With me?
Yes, madam.
As I waited for my hat in the hall, the door of the library opened, and Jordan Baker and Gatsby came out together.
I've just heard the most amazing thing. How long were we in there?
About an hour.
It was simply amazing, but I swore I wouldn't tell it, and here I am, tantalizing you. Please come and see me. Phone book under the name of Mrs. Sigourney Howard, my aunt.
Gatsby, I want to apologize for not having known you in the garden.
Don't mention it. Don't give it another thought. All right, old sport? And don't forget, we're going up in the hydroplane tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Philadelphia wants you on the phone, sir.
All right, in a minute. Tell them I'll be right there. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, old sport. Good night.
Chapter 4. Exterior, Gatsby's mansion in the late morning.
At 9 o'clock one morning late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave out a burst of melody from its 3-noted horn. It was the first time he had called on me. Though I had gone to 2 of his parties, mounted in his hydroplane, and, at his urgent invitation, made frequent use of his beach.
Good morning, old sport. Hey, you're having lunch with me today, and I thought that we'd ride up together. The car's pretty, isn't it? All right, old sport. Haven't you seen it before?
I'd seen it. Everybody had seen it. It was a rich cream color, bright with nickels, swollen here and there in its monstrous length. We took off toward the city.
Exterior, car through the city, day.
Look here, old sport. What's your opinion of me, anyhow?
Well, I think you're kind.
Well, I'm going to tell you something about my life. I don't want you to get a wrong idea of me from all these stories you hear. I'll tell you God's truth. I am the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West. They're all dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford, because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It's a family tradition.
What part of the Middle West?
San Francisco. My family all died, and I came into a good deal of money. After that, I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe. Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that had happened to me a long time ago. Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die, but I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as first lieutenant when it began, and then I was promoted to be a major, and every allied government gave me a decoration, even Montenegro. Little Montenegro down on the Adriatic Sea. Little Montenegro. That's the one for Montenegro.
Major J. Gatsby, for valor extraordinary.
Here's another thing I always carry. A souvenir of Oxford days. It was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Dorchester.
Still driving, he produces a photograph of half a dozen young men in blazers. There is Gatsby, looking a little but not too much younger, with a cricket bat in his hand.
I'm going to make a big request to you today. So I thought that you ought to know something about me. I just didn't want you to think that I was just some nobody. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. And you'll hear about that this afternoon. I happened to find out that you're taking Miss Baker to tea.
Do you mean you're in love with Miss Baker?
No, old sport. I'm not. But Miss Baker has kindly consented to speak to you about this matter.
I hadn't asked Jordan to lunch to discuss you, Gatsby. Then heard the familiar jug, spat of a motorcycle, and a frantic policeman rode alongside.
All right, old sport?
Gatsby takes a white card from his wallet and waves it before the man's eyes. The policeman excuses him and falls behind.
What was that? The picture from Oxford?
I was able to do the commissioner a favor once, and he sends me a Christmas card every year.
Anything can happen now that we've slid over this bridge, I thought. Shortly thereafter, Gatsby and I met for lunch, and my eyes picked him out obscurely in the anteroom, talking to another man.
Interior, anteroom, afternoon.
Mr. Carraway, this is my friend, Mr. Wolfsheim.
And what do you think I did?
What?
I handed the money to Catspaw and I said, "All right, Catspaw, don't pay him a penny till he shuts his mouth." He shut it then and there. This is a nice restaurant here, but I like to cross the street much better.
Yes, highballs. It's too hot over there.
Hot and small, yeah. But full of memories.
Sorry, what place is that?
The old metropole filled with faces, dead and gone. Filled with friends gone now forever. I can't forget so long as I live the night that they shot Rosie Rosenthal there. I understand you're looking for a business connection.
Oh, no. This isn't the man.
No?
No. This is just a friend. I told you we'd talk about that some other time.
Beg your pardon? I had a wrong man.
Look here, old sport. I'm afraid I made you a little angry this morning in the car.
I don't like mysteries, and I don't understand why you won't come out frankly and tell me what you want. Why has it all got to come through Miss Baker?
It's nothing underhand. Miss Baker's a great sportswoman, you know, and she'd never do anything that wasn't all right.
Suddenly, Gatsby looks at his watch, jumps up and hurries from the room, leaving Nick with Mr. Wolfsheim at the table.
He has the telephone. Fine fellow, isn't he? Handsome. Handsome to look at. Perfect gentleman. He's an Oxford man. He went to Oxford College in England. You know Oxford College?
I've heard of it.
It's one of the most famous colleges in the world.
Have you known Gatsby for a long time?
Several years. Made the pleasure of his acquaintance just after the war. But I knew I had discovered a man of fine breeding after I talked with him an hour. I said to myself, there's the kind of man you'd like to take home and introduce to your mother and sister. I see you looking at my cuff buttons. Finest specimens of human molars.
Well, that's a very interesting idea.
Gatsby comes back to the table.
I've enjoyed my lunch, and I'm going to run off from you two young men before I outstay my welcome.
Well, don't hurry, Meyer.
You're very polite. But I belong to another generation, and I won't impose myself on you any longer.
Who is he, anyhow? An actor?
No.
A dentist?
Meyer Wolfsheim? He's a gambler. He's the man who fixed the World Series back in 1919.
Fixed the World
He
Series.
just saw the opportunity.
Why isn't he in jail?
Well, they can't get him, old sport. He's a smart man.
Suddenly, Tom Buchanan comes from across the restaurant and beelines to Nick.
Where have you been? Daisy's furious because you haven't caught up.
This is Mr. Gatsby, Mr. Buchanan.
How have you been anyhow? How'd you happen to come up this far to eat?
Well, I've been having lunch with Mr. Gatsby. Then I turned toward Mr. Gatsby, but he was no longer there.
Interior, Plaza Hotel, day.
One October day in 1917, I was walking along from one place to another, half on the sidewalks and half on the lawns. The largest of the banners and the largest of the lawns belonged to Daisy Faye's house. She was just 18. 2 years older than me, and by far the most popular of all the young girls in Louisville. She dressed in white, and she had a little white roadster. And all day long, the telephone rang in her house, and excited young officers from Camp Taylor demanded the privilege of monopolizing her that night. When I came opposite her house that morning, her white roadster was beside the curb, and she was sitting in it with a lieutenant I'd never seen before. They were so engrossed in each other that she didn't see me until I was 5 feet away. "Hello, Jordan," she called unexpectedly. "Please come here." I was flattered that she wanted to speak to me because of all the older girls I admired her the most. The officer looked at Daisy while she was speaking, in a way that every young girl wants to be looked at sometime. And because it seemed romantic to me, I've remembered the incident ever since. His name was J. Gatsby. And I didn't lay eyes on him again for over 4 years. Even after I'd met him on Long Island, I didn't realize it was the same man. Wild rumors were circulating about her, how her mother had found her packing her bag one winter night to go to New York and say goodbye to a soldier who was going overseas. She was effectually prevented, but she wasn't on speaking terms with her family for several weeks. After that, she didn't play around with soldiers anymore. She had a debut after the armistice, and in February she was presumably engaged to a man from New Orleans. In June, she married Tom Buchanan of Chicago, with more pomp and circumstance than Louisville had ever knew before. The day before the wedding, he gave her a string of pearls valued at $350,000. I was bridesmaid, and I came into her room half an hour before the bridal dinner, and I found her lying on her bed, as lovely as the June night in her flowered dress, and as drunk as a monkey. She had a bottle of Sauterne in one hand and a letter in the other. She reached with her into the wastepaper basket she had with her on the bed, and she pulled out a string of pearls. "Take him downstairs and give him back to whoever they belong to. Tell them all Daisy's changed her mind. Say Daisy's changed her mind." She began to cry. She cried and cried. I rushed out, and I found her mother's maid, and we locked the door, and we got her into a cold bath. She wouldn't let go of the letter. She took it into the tub with her, and she squeezed it up into a wet ball. And she only let me leave it in the soap dish when she saw that it was coming to pieces like snow. But she didn't say another word. Next day, at 5 o'clock, she married Tom Buchanan without so much as a shiver, and started off on a 3-month trip to the South Seas. I saw them in Santa Barbara when they came back, and I thought that I'd never seen a girl so mad about her husband. If he left the room for a minute, she'd look around uneasily and say, "Where's Tom gone?" And she'd wear the most abstracted expression until she saw him coming in the door. She used to sit on the sand with his head in her lap by the hour, rubbing her fingers over his eyes and looking at him with unfathomable delight. It was touching to see them together. It made you laugh in a hushed, fascinated way. That was in August. A week after I left Santa Barbara, Tom ran into a wagon on the Ventura Road one night, and he ripped a front wheel off his car. The girl who was with him got into the papers too because her arm was broken. The next April, Daisy had her little girl, and they went to France for a year. I saw them one spring in Cannes, and later in DeVille, and then they came back to Chicago to settle down. Daisy was popular in Chicago, as you know. They moved with a fast crowd, all of them young and rich and wild, but she came out with an absolutely perfect reputation. Perhaps because she doesn't drink. Well, about 6 weeks ago, she heard the name Gatsby for the first time in years. It was when I asked you. Do you remember? If you knew Gatsby in West Egg, after you'd gone home, she came into my room and woke me up and said, "What Gatsby?" And when I described him, I was half asleep. She said in the strangest voice that it must be the man she used to know. It wasn't until then that I connected this Gatsby with the officer in her white car.
It was a strange coincidence.
But it wasn't a coincidence at all.
Well, why not?
Gatsby bought that house so that Daisy would be just across the bay. He wants to know if you'll invite Daisy to your house some afternoon and then let him come over.
The modesty of that demand leaves me shaken. He had waited 5 years and bought a mansion where he dispensed starlight to casual moths so that he could come over some afternoon to a stranger's garden. Did I have to know all this before he could ask such a little thing?
He's afraid. He's waited so long, he thought you might be offended. You see, he's a regular tough underneath it all.
Why didn't he ask you to arrange a meeting?
Well, he wants her to see his house, and your house is right next door. I think he half expected her to wander into one of his parties some night, but she never did. Then he began asking people casually if they knew her, and I was the first one he found. When I said you were a particular friend of Tom's, he started to abandon the whole idea. He doesn't know very much about Tom, though he says he's read the Chicago paper for years just on the chance of catching a glimpse of Daisy's name.
There are only the pursued, the pursuing, the busy, and the tired.
And Daisy ought to have something in her life.
Does she want to see Gatsby?
Just not to know about it. Gatsby doesn't want her to know. You're just supposed to invite her to tea.
They pass through a patch of dark trees into a pale light and share a kiss. Chapter 5. Exterior, West Egg, at night. Nick arrives back home in a taxi.
When I came home to West Egg that night, I was afraid for a moment that my house was on fire. 2 o'clock, and the whole corner of the peninsula was blazing with light. Turning a corner, I saw that it was Gatsby's house, lit from tower to cellar.
Nick's taxi groans away. Gatsby walks toward Nick across his lawn.
Your place looks like the World's Fair.
Does it? I've been glancing into some of the rooms. Let's go to Coney Island, old sport. In my car.
It's too late.
Well, suppose we take a plunge in the swimming pool. I haven't made use of it all summer.
I've got to go to bed.
All right.
Gatsby waits, looking at Nick with suppressed eagerness.
I talked with Miss Baker. I'm going to call up Daisy tomorrow and invite her over here to tea.
Oh, that's all right. I don't want to put you into any trouble.
What day would suit you?
What day would suit you? I don't want to put you into any trouble, you see.
No, how about the day after tomorrow?
I want to get the grass cut.
I suspected that he meant my grass.
There's another little thing.
Would you rather put it off for a few days?
No, it's not about that. At least, why, look here, old sport. You don't make much money, do you?
Not very much.
Okay, so I thought you didn't. If you'll pardon me, you see, I carry on a little business on the side, a sort of sideline, you understand? And I thought that if you don't make very much, you're selling bonds. Aren't you, old sport?
I'm trying to.
Okay, well, this would interest you. It wouldn't take up much of your time, and you might pick up a nice bit of money. It happens to be a rather confidential sort of thing.
I realize now that under different circumstances, that conversation might have been one of the crises of my life. But because the offer was obviously and tactlessly for a service to be rendered, I had no choice except to cut him off there. I've got my hands full. I'm much obliged, but I couldn't take on.
You wouldn't have to do any business with Wolfsheim.
Evidently, he thought that I was shying away from the connection mentioned at lunch. But I assured him he was wrong.
Gatsby waits a moment longer, then goes unwillingly home. Exterior, Buchanan Mansion, morning.
I called up Daisy from the office next morning and invited her to come to tea. Don't bring Tom.
What?
Don't bring Tom.
Who is Tom?
The day agreed upon was pouring rain. At 11 o'clock, a man in a raincoat dragging a lawnmower tapped at my front door and said that Mr. Gatsby had sent him over to cut my grass. An hour later, the front door opened nervously, and Gatsby, in a white flannel suit, silver shirt, and gold-colored tie, hurried in. He was pale, and there were dark signs of sleeplessness between his eyes.
Is everything all right?
The grass looks fine, if that's what you mean.
What grass? Oh, right, the grass in the yard. It looks very good. One of the papers said that they thought that the rain would stop about 4. I think it was the Journal. Have you got everything you need in the shape of tea?
The rain cools at about 3:30 to a damp mist. Gatsby looks with vacant eyes through a copy of Clay's Economics and peers towards the bleared windows from time to time as if a series of invisible but alarming happenings were taking place outside.
I'm going home.
Now, why is that?
Nobody's coming to tea. It's too late.
Gatsby looks at his watch as if there was some pressing demand.
I can't wait all day.
Don't be silly. It's just 2 minutes to 4.
Gatsby sits down miserably, and simultaneously a sound of a motor turns into Nick's lane. Gatsby and Nick both jump up. Nick walks out onto the yard. Under the dripping, bare lilac trees, a large, open car comes up to the drive and stops. Daisy's face tips sideways beneath a 3-cornered lavender hat and looks out at Nick with a bright, ecstatic smile.
Is this absolutely where you live, my dearest one?
We went in. To my overwhelming surprise, the living room was deserted. Well, that's funny.
What's funny?
She turned her head as there was a light, dignified knocking at the front door. I went out and opened it. Gatsby, pale as death, with his hands plunged like weights in his coat pocket. For half a minute there isn't a sound. Then, from the living room, a sort of choking murmur and part of a laugh, followed by...
I certainly am awfully glad to see you again.
We've met before.
We haven't met for many years.
5 years. Next November.
I've got to grab something.
Where are you going?
I'll be back.
I've got to speak to you about something before you go.
Gatsby follows Nick wildly into the kitchen and closes the door.
God, what is the matter?
This is a terrible mistake. This is a terrible, terrible mistake.
Hey, you're just embarrassed, that's all. Daisy's embarrassed too.
She's embarrassed?
Just as much as you are.
Don't talk so loud.
You're acting like a little boy. Not only that, but you're rude. Daisy is sitting in there, alone.
He opens the door cautiously and walks back into the other room.
I walked out the back way. Once more, it was pouring, and my irregular lawn, well shaved by Gatsby's gardener, abounded in small, muddy swamps and prehistoric marshes. There was nothing to look at from under the tree except Gatsby's enormous house, so I stared at it, like Kant at his church steeple, for half an hour. I went back in, but there was a change in Gatsby that was simply confounding. He literally glowed.
Oh, hello, old sport.
It's stopped raining.
Has it? What do you think of that? It stopped raining.
Well, I'm glad, Jay.
Her throat, full of aching, grieving beauty, told only of her unexpected joy.
I want you and Daisy to come over to my house. I'd like to show her around.
You're sure you want me to come?
Absolutely, old sport.
Daisy goes upstairs to wash her face. Gatsby and Nick wait outside on the lawn.
My house looks well, doesn't it? You see how the whole front of it catches the light?
It's splendid.
It took me 3 years to even earn the money to buy it.
I thought you inherited your money.
I did, old sport, but I lost most of it in the big panic. The panic of the war.
What business are you in?
That's my affair. Sorry. I've been in several things. I was in the drug business, and then I was in the oil business. But I'm not in either one now. Do you mean that you've been thinking over what I proposed the other night?
That huge place there?
Do you like it?
I love it, but I don't see how you live there all alone.
Well, I keep it full of interesting people, night and day. People who do interesting things. Celebrated people.
As he wandered inside, he hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy. And I think he revalued everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. Sometimes, too, he stared around at his possessions in a dazed way, as though in her actual and astounding presence, none of it was any longer real.
I've got a man in England who buys me clothes. He sends over a selection of things at the beginning of each season, spring and fall.
Gatsby takes out a pile of shirts and throws them one by one before Nick and Daisy.
Shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel, which lost their folds as they fell and covered the table in many-colored disarray. While we admired, he brought more, and the soft, rich heap mounted higher shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids and coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange and monograms of Indian blue.
Suddenly, Daisy bends her head into the shirts and begins to cry stormily.
They're such beautiful shirts. It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before.
Outside Gatsby's window, it begins to rain again. Nick, Daisy, and Gatsby stand in a row, looking at the corrugated surface of the Sound.
If it wasn't for the mist, we could see your home across the bay. You always have a green light that burns all night at the end of your dock.
Nick notices a large photograph of an elderly man hung on the wall over his desk.
Who's this?
Oh, that. That's Mr. Dan Cody, old sport.
The name sounded faintly familiar.
Oh, he's dead now. He used to be my best friend years ago.
A phone rings. Gatsby answers.
Yeah, well, I can't talk now. I can't talk now, old sport. No, I said a small town. He must know what a small town is. Well, he's not used to us. Detroit is his idea of a small town.
Come here, quick.
The rain was still falling, but the darkness had parted in the west, and there was a pink and gold billow of foamy clouds above the sea.
Look at that. I'd like to just get one of those pink clouds and put you in it and push you around.
I know what we'll do. Ha! We'll have Klipspringer play the piano. Ewing!
Gatsby runs out and returns with an embarrassed, slightly worn young man with shell-rimmed glasses.
Did we interrupt your exercises?
I was asleep. That is, I'd been asleep and then I got up.
Klipspringer plays the piano, don't you, Ewing, old sport?
I don't play well. I hardly play at all. I'm all out of practice.
Well, we'll go downstairs.
Interior lounge, moments later.
Don't talk so much, old sport. Play! Play!
I looked once more at them, and they looked back at me, remotely, possessed by intense life. Then I went out of the room, and down the marble steps into the rain, leaving them there, together.
Chapter 6. Exterior, Gatsby Mansion, afternoon. A party of 3 arrived at Gatsby's mansion on horseback. Tom and a man named Sloane and a lady in a brown riding habit who had been there previously.
I'm delighted to see you. I'm delighted that you dropped in. Sit right down. Have a cigarette or cigar. I'll have something to drink for you in just a minute.
Moved by an irresistible impulse, Gatsby turns to Tom, who had accepted the introduction as a stranger.
I believe we've met somewhere before, Mr. Buchanan.
Oh, yes, we did. I remember very well.
About 2 weeks ago.
That's right. You were with Nick here.
I know your wife.
That's so. You live here, Nick.
Next door. That's so.
We'll all come over to your next party, Mr. Gatsby. What do you say?
Certainly. I'd be delighted to have you.
Be very nice. Well, I think I ought to be starting home.
Please don't hurry. Why don't you stay for supper? I wouldn't be surprised if some other people dropped in from New York.
Oh, you should come to supper with me. Both of you.
Come along.
I mean it. I'd love to have you. Lots of room.
Gatsby looked at me questioningly. He wanted to go, and he didn't see that Mr. Sloane had determined he shouldn't. I'm afraid I won't be able to.
Well, you come.
Well, I haven't got a horse. I used to ride in the army, but I've never bought a horse. I'll have to follow you in my car. Excuse me for just a minute.
The rest of them walk out on the porch where Sloane and the lady begin an impassioned conversation outside.
My God. I believe the man's coming. Doesn't he know she doesn't want him?
She does. She says she does want him.
She has a big dinner party and won't know a soul there. I wonder where in the devil he met Daisy. By God, I may be old-fashioned in my ideas, but women run around too much these days to suit me. They meet all kinds of crazy fish.
Mr. Sloane and the lady walk down the steps and mount their horses.
Come on, we're late. We've got to go. Tell him we couldn't wait, will you?
Tom was evidently perturbed that Daisy's running around alone, for on the following Saturday night he came with her to Gatsby's party. Perhaps his presence gave the evening its peculiar quality of oppressiveness. It stands out in my memory from Gatsby's other parties that summer. There were the same people, or at least the same sort of people, the same profusion of champagne, the same many-colored, many-keyed commotion, but I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. Perhaps I had merely grown used to it, grown to accept West Egg as a world completely in itself, with its own standards, its own great figures, second to nothing because it had no consciousness of being so. And now I was looking at it again, through Daisy's eyes. It is invariably saddening to look through new eyes at things upon which you have expanded your own powers of adjustment.
These things excite me so. If you want to kiss me any time during the evening, Nick, just let me know and I'll be glad to arrange it for you. Just mention my name, or present a green card. I'm giving out green.
Look around.
I'm looking around.
You must see the faces of many people you've heard about.
We don't go around very much. In fact, I was just thinking, I don't know a soul here.
Perhaps you know that lady.
Gatsby indicates a gorgeous, scarcely human orchid of a woman sitting under a white plum tree. Tom and Daisy stare with that peculiar, unreal feeling that accompanies the recognition of a hitherto ghostly celebrity of the movies.
She's lovely.
The man bending over her is her director.
He took them ceremoniously from group to group. Mrs. Buchanan and Mr. Buchanan. After an instant's hesitation, he added, the polo player.
Oh, no, not me.
But evidently, the sound of it pleased Gatsby, for Tom remained the polo player for the rest of the evening.
I've never met so many celebrities. I like that man. What was his name with the sort of blue nose?
He's a small producer.
Well, I liked him anyhow.
I'd rather not be the player. I'd rather look at all the famous people in oblivion.
Daisy and Gatsby danced. I remember being surprised by his graceful conservative foxtrot. I had never seen him dance before. Then they sauntered over to my house and sat on the steps for half an hour, while at her request, I remained watchfully in the garden.
In case there's a fire or a flood or an act of God.
Tom appears from his oblivion.
Mind if I eat with some people over here? A fellow's getting off some funny stuff.
Go ahead. And if you want to take down any addresses, here's my little gold pencil.
She looked around after a moment and told me the girl was common, but pretty. And I knew that except for the half hour she'd been alone with Gatsby, she was not having a good time.
Daisy watches the moving picture director and his star.
I like her. I think she's lovely.
But the rest offended her, and inarguably because it wasn't a gesture, but an emotion. She was appalled by West Egg. She saw something awful in the very simplicity she failed to understand. I sat on the front steps with them while they waited for their cars.
Who is this Gatsby, anyhow? I mean, some kind of big bootlegger?
Where'd you hear that?
I didn't hear it. I imagined it. A lot of these newly rich people are just big bootleggers, you know.
Well, not Gatsby.
Well, he certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together.
At least they're more investing than the people we know.
You didn't look so interested.
Well, I was.
Did you notice Daisy's face when that girl asked her to put her under a cold shower?
Lots of people come who haven't been invited. That girl hadn't been invited. They simply forced their way in, and he's too polite to object.
I'd like to know who he is and what he does, and I think I'll make a point of finding out.
I can tell you right now. He owns some drugstores. A lot of drugstores. He built them up himself. Good night, Nick.
I stayed late that night. Gatsby asked me to wait until he was free, and I lingered in the garden until the inevitable swimming party had run up, chilled, and exalted. From the black beach until the lights were extinguished in the guest rooms overhead, when he came down the steps at last, the tanned skin was drawn unusually tight on his face, and his eyes were bright and tired.
She didn't like it.
Of course she did.
She didn't like it. She didn't have a good time. I feel far away from her. It's hard to make her understand.
You mean about the dance?
The dance. Old sport, the dance is unimportant.
He wanted nothing less of Daisy than that she should go to Tom and say, I never loved you.
She doesn't understand. She used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours.
I wouldn't ask too much of her. You can't repeat the past.
Can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can. I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before. She'll see. One autumn night, 5 years before, we had been walking down the streets, and the leaves were falling, and we came to a place where there were no trees, and the sidewalk was white with moonlight. And we stopped here, and we turned towards each other. Now, it was a cool night with that mysterious excitement in it which comes at the 2 changes of the year. The quiet lights in the houses were humming out into the darkness, and there was a stir and bustle among the stars. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw that the blocks of the sidewalks really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. I could climb to it. If I climbed alone, and once there, I could suck on the pap of life. I could gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. And my heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to my own. And I knew that when I kissed this girl and forever wed my unutterable visions to her perishable breath, my mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So I waited. I listened for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. And then I kissed her. And at my lips' touch, she blossomed for me like a flower. And the incarnation was complete.
Through all he said, even through his appalling sentimentality, I was reminded of something. An elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere a long time ago. For a moment, a phrase tried to take shape in my mouth, and my lips parted like a dumb man's, as though there was more struggling upon them than a wisp of startled air. But they made no sound, and what I had almost remembered was uncommunicable forever.
Chapter 7. Exterior, Gatsby's mansion during the day. It's the next day, and Nick rings the doorbell. A butler answers Gatsby's door.
Is Mr. Gatsby sick?
No, sir.
I hadn't seen him around, and I was rather worried. Tell him Mr. Caraway came over.
Who?
Caraway.
Caraway. All right, I'll tell him.
A man informed me that Gatsby had dismissed every servant in his house a week ago and replaced them with half a dozen others. The next day, Gatsby called me on the phone.
Interior, Nick's home, during the day.
Going away?
No, old sport.
I heard you fired all your servants.
I wanted somebody who wouldn't gossip. Daisy comes over quite often. In the afternoons.
So the whole caravansary had fallen in like a card house at the disapproval in her eyes.
There's some people Wolfsheim wanted to do something for. They're all brothers and sisters. They used to run a small hotel.
I see.
I'm calling on Daisy's request. Would you come up to lunch at her house tomorrow? Miss Baker will be there.
A half an hour later, Daisy herself telephoned and seemed relieved to find that I was coming.
Interior, Buchanan House, during the day.
The next day was broiling, almost the last, certainly the warmest of the summer. Through the hall of the Buchanan's house blew a faint wind, carrying the sound of the telephone bell out to Gatsby and me as we waited at the door. The room, shadowed well with awnings, was dark and cool. Daisy and Jordan lay upon an enormous couch like silver idols, weighing down their own white dresses against the singing breeze of the fans.
We can't move.
And Mr. Thomas Buchanan, the athlete?
We hear Tom's voice, gruff, muffled, and husky, speak at the telephone. Gatsby stands in the center of the crimson carpet and gazes around with fascinated eyes. Daisy watches him and laughs her sweet, excited laugh.
The rumor is that that's Tom's girl on the telephone.
Very well then. I won't sell you the car at all. I'm under no obligations to you, at all. And as for you bothering me about it at lunchtime, I won't stand that at all.
Holding down the receiver.
No, he's not. It's a bona fide deal. I happen to know about it.
Tom flings open the door and looks out at the space for a moment with his thick body.
Mr. Gatsby! I'm glad to see you, sir.
Make us a cold drink.
Tom leaves the room. Daisy goes over to Gatsby and pulls his face down, kissing him.
You know I love you.
You forget there's a lady present?
You kiss Nick too.
What a low, vulgar girl.
I don't care.
She sits down on the couch, and a freshly laundered nurse leads a little girl into the room.
Blessed precious. Come to your own mother that loves you.
The child rushes across the room and roots shyly into her mother's dress.
The blessed precious. Did mother get powder on your old yellowy hair? Stand up now and say howdy do.
Gatsby kept looking at the child with surprise. I don't think he had ever really believed in its existence before.
I got dressed before luncheon.
That's because your mother wanted to show you off. You dream, you absolute little dream.
Yes. Aunt Jordan's got on a white dress too.
How do you like mother's friends? Do you think they're pretty?
Where's Daddy?
She doesn't look like her father. She looks like me. She's got my hair and shape of the face.
Daisy sits back up on the couch. The nurse takes a step forward and holds out her hand.
Goodbye, sweetheart.
With a reluctant, backward glance, the well-disciplined child holds the nurse's hand and is pulled out the door. Tom returns preceding 4 gin rickeys that click full of ice.
They certainly look cool.
I read somewhere the sun's getting hotter every year. It seems that pretty soon the sun's going to fall into the sun. Or, wait a minute, it's just the opposite. The sun's getting colder every year.
What'll we do with ourselves this afternoon? And the day after that, and the next 30 years?
Oh, don't be morbid. Life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall.
But it's so hot and everything's so confused. Let's all go to town.
I've heard of making a garage out of a stable, but I'm the first man who ever made a stable out of a garage.
Who wants to go to town? Ah, you look so cool.
Their eyes meet, and they stare together at each other, alone in space.
You always look so cool. I love you.
Tom Buchanan saw. He was astounded. His mouth opened a little, and he looked at Gatsby and then back at Daisy as if he had just recognized her as someone he knew a long time ago.
He gets up. His eyes flash between Gatsby and his wife. No one moves.
All right, I'm perfectly willing to go to town. Come on, we're all going to town. Come on, what's the matter anyhow? If we're going to town, let's start.
Are we just going to go? Like this? Aren't we going to let anyone smoke a cigarette first?
Everybody smoked all through lunch.
Oh, let's have fun. It's too hot to fuss. Have it your way. Come on, Jordan.
I don't see the idea of going to town. You know, women get these notions in their head.
Shall we get anything to drink?
Whiskey. I'll get some whiskey.
I can't say anything in this household, sport.
She's got an indiscreet voice. It's
Her
full
voice
of...
is full of money.
That was it? I'd never understood before. It was full of money. That was the inexhaustible charm that rose and fell in it, the jingle of it, the cymbal song of it. High in the White Palace, the king's daughter, the golden girl.
Tom comes out of the house wrapping a cork bottle in a towel, followed by Daisy and Jordan wearing some tight hats of metallic cloths and carrying light capes over their arms.
Shall we all go in my car? I ought to have left it in the shade.
Is it standard shift?
Yes.
Well, you take my coupe and let me drive your car to town.
I don't think there's much gas.
Plenty of gas. And if it runs out, I can stop at a drugstore. You can buy anything at a drugstore nowadays.
Daisy looked at Tom, frowning, and an indefinable expression at once definitely unfamiliar and vaguely recognizable, as if I had only heard it described in words, passed over Gatsby's face.
Come on, Daisy. I'll take you in the circus wagon.
You take Nick and Jordan. We'll follow you in the coupe.
She walks close to Gatsby and touches his coat with her hand. Jordan, Tom, and Nick get into the front seat of Gatsby's car. Tom pushes the unfamiliar gears sensitively, and then they shoot off into the oppressive heat.
Did you see that?
See what?
You think I'm pretty dumb, don't you? Yeah, perhaps I am, but I have an almost a second sight. Sometimes it tells me what to do. Maybe you don't believe that, but science.
He pauses. The immediate contingency overtakes him, pulling him back from the edge of the theoretical abyss.
I've made a small investigation of this fellow. You know, I could have gone deeper if I'd known.
Do you mean you've been to a medium?
What? A medium?
About Gatsby?
About Gatsby? No, I haven't. I said I've been making a small investigation in his past.
And you found he was an Oxford man.
An Oxford man? Like hell he is. He wears a pink suit.
Nevertheless, he's an Oxford man.
Oxford, New Mexico. Something like that.
Listen, Tom, if you're such a snob, why did you invite him to
Daisy invited him. She knew him before we were married, God knows where.
We were all irritable now with the fading ale, and aware of it, we drove for a while in silence. Then, as Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's faded eyes came into sight down the road, I remembered Gatsby's caution about gasoline.
We've got enough to get us to town.
But there's a garage right here. I don't want to get stalled in this baking heat.
Exterior, Wilson's garage, afternoon. Tom throws on both brakes impatiently, and they slide to an abrupt, dusty stop under Wilson's sign. After a moment, Wilson emerges from the interior of his establishment and gazes hollow-eyed at the car.
Let's have some gas. What do you think we stopped for? To admire the view?
I'm sick.
What's the matter?
I'm all run down.
Well, shall I help myself? You sounded well enough on the phone.
With an effort, Wilson leaves the shade in support of the doorway and, breathing hard, unscrews the cap off the tank.
I didn't mean to interrupt your lunch, but I needed money pretty bad, and I was wondering what you were going to do with your old car.
How do you like this one? I bought it last week.
It's a nice yellow one.
Yeah, you like to buy it?
Big chance, no. But I could make some money on the other.
What do you want money for all of a sudden?
I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go west.
Your wife does.
She's been talking about it for 10 years, and now she's going whether she wants to or not. I'm going to get her away.
What do I owe you?
I just got wised up to something funny these last 2 days. That's why I want to get away. That's why I've been bothering you about the car.
What do I owe you?
$1.20.
I realized that so far his suspicions hadn't alighted on Tom. He had discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock had made him physically sick. I stared at him, and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men.
I'll let you have that card. I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon.
In one of the windows of the garage, the curtains had been moved aside a little, and Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. I realized that her eyes, wide with jealous terror, were fixed not on Tom, but on Jordan Baker, whom she took to be his wife. There is no confusion like the confusion of a simple mind. And as we drove away, Tom was feeling the hot whips of panic. His wife and his mistress, until an hour ago secure and inviolate, were slipping precipitately from his control.
Exterior, New York Street, daytime. Tom's car pulls next to Gatsby's.
Where are we going?
How about the movies?
It's so hot. You go. We'll ride around and meet you after. We'll meet on some corner. I'll be the man smoking 2 cigarettes.
Can't argue about it here. You follow me to the south side of Central Park in front of the plaza.
Interior, hotel room, daytime.
The prolonged and tumultuous argument that ended by herding us into that room eludes me, though I have a sharp physical memory that, in the course of it, my underwear kept climbing like a damp snake around my legs, and intermittent beads of sweat raced cool across my back.
The room is large and stifling. Daisy goes to the mirror and stands with her back to Nick, Tom, Gatsby, and Jordan, fixing her hair.
It's a swell suite.
Open another window.
There aren't any more.
Well, we'd better telephone for an axe.
Now, the thing to do is to forget about the heat. You make it 10 times worse by crabbing about it.
He unrolls the bottle of whiskey from the towel and puts it on the table.
Why not let her alone, old sport? You're the one that wanted to come to town.
That's a great expression of yours, isn't it?
What is?
All this old sport business. Where'd you pick that up?
Now see here, Tom, if you're going to make personal remarks, I won't stay here a minute. Call up and order some ice for the mint julep.
By the way, Mr. Gatsby, I understand you're an Oxford man.
Not exactly.
Oh, yes, I understand you went to Oxford.
Yes, I went there.
You must have gone there about the same time Bill Lixie went to New Haven.
I told you I went there.
I heard you. I'd like to know when.
It was in 1919. I only stayed 5 months. That's why I can't really call myself an Oxford man.
Tom glanced around to see if we mirrored his unbelief. But we were all looking at Gatsby.
It was an opportunity they gave to some of the officers after the armistice. We could go to any of the universities in England or France.
I wanted to get up and slap him on the back. I had one of those renewals of complete faith in him that I had experienced before.
Daisy rises, smiling faintly, and goes to the table.
Open the whiskey, Tom, and I'll make you a mint julep.
Wait a minute, wait. I want to ask Mr. Gatsby one more question.
Go on.
What kind of row are you trying to cause in my house anyhow?
They were out in the open at last, and Gatsby was content.
He isn't causing a row, you're causing a row. Please have a little self-control.
Self-control! I suppose the latest thing to do is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from Nowhere make love to your wife. Well, if that's the idea, you can count me out. And nowadays, people begin by sneering at family life and family institutions. Next day, they'll throw everything overboard and have intermarriage between black and white. You know, I know I'm not very popular. I don't give big parties. I suppose you've got to make your house into a pigsty in order to have any friends. You know, in the modern world.
I've got something to tell you, old sport.
Please don't. Please, let's all go home. Why don't we all go home?
That's a good idea. Come on, Tom.
Nobody wants a drink. I want to know what Mr. Gatsby has to tell
Your wife doesn't love you. She never loved you. She loves me.
You must be crazy.
She never loved you. Do you hear? She only married you because I was poor and she was tired of waiting for me. It was a terrible mistake. But in her heart, she never loved anyone except for me.
Sit down, Daisy. Daisy, what's been going on? I want to hear all
I
about
told you what's been going on. It's been going on for 5 years and you didn't know.
You've been seeing this fellow for 5 years.
Not seeing. No, we couldn't meet. But both of us, we loved each other all that time, old sport, and you didn't know.
No, that's all. You are crazy. I can't speak about what happened 5 years ago because I didn't know Daisy then, and I'll be damned if I see how you got within a mile of her unless you brought the groceries to the back door. Yeah, but all the rest of that's a goddamn lie. Daisy loved me when she married me. She loves me now.
No.
Yeah, she does, though. She does. She does. The trouble is that sometimes she gets foolish ideas in her head and, she doesn't know what she's doing. And what's more, I love Daisy too. Once in a while I go off on a spree and make a fool of myself, but I always come back and in my heart, I love her all the time.
You're revolting. Do you know why we left Chicago? I'm surprised they didn't treat you to the story of that little spree.
Daisy, that's all over now. It doesn't matter anymore. Just tell him the truth. That you never loved him, and it's all wiped out forever.
Why, how could I love him? Possibly.
You never loved him.
Her eyes fall on Jordan and Nick with a sort of appeal, as though she's now realized at last what she was doing, and as though she had never all along intended on doing anything at all. But it was done now. It was too late.
I never loved him.
Not at Kapiolani?
No.
Not that day I carried you down from the punch bowl to keep your shoes dry? Daisy.
Please don't. There, Jay. Oh, you want too much. I love you now, isn't that enough? I can't help what's past. I did love him once, but I love you too.
You loved me too?
Even that's a lie! She didn't know you were alive! Why, there's things between Daisy and me that you'll never know. Things that neither of us will ever forget.
I want to speak to Daisy alone. She's all excited now.
Even alone, I can't say I never loved Tom. It wouldn't be true.
Of course it wouldn't.
As if it mattered to you.
Of course it matters. I'm gonna take better care of you from now on.
You don't understand! You're not going to take care of her anymore!
Well, why's that?
Daisy's leaving you!
Nonsense.
I am, though.
She's not leaving me. Certainly not for a common swindler who had to steal the ring he put on her finger.
I won't stand this, oh please, let's get out!
Who are you, anyhow? You're one of that bunch that hangs around with Mayor Wolfshine. That much I happen to know. I made a little investigation into your affairs. I'll carry it out further tomorrow.
You can suit yourself about that, old sport.
I found out what your drugstores were. He and this Wolfshine bought up a lot of side street drugstores here in Chicago and sold grain alcohol over the counter. That's one of his little stunts. I picked him for a bootlegger the first time I saw him, and I wasn't far from wrong about it.
I guess your friend Walter Chase wasn't too proud to come in on it.
And you left him in the lurch. You left him in the lurch, didn't you? You let him go to jail for a month over in New Jersey. God, you ought to hear Walter on the subject of you.
He came to us dead broke. He was very glad to pick up some money, old sport.
Don't you call me old sport. Walter could have you up on the betting laws too, but Wolfsheim scared him into shutting his mouth.
That unfamiliar yet recognizable look was back again on Gatsby's face.
That drugstore business was just small change, but you've got something on now that Walter's afraid to tell me about.
Please, Tom, I can't stand this anymore.
Her frightened eyes told whatever intentions, whatever courage she had had was definitely gone.
You two start on home, Daisy, and Mr. Gatsby's car. Go on. He won't annoy you. He's not going to annoy you. I think he realizes that his presumptuous little flirtation is over.
Daisy and Gatsby leave without a word, accidental, isolated like ghosts, even from our pity. Tom gets up and begins wrapping the unopened bottle of whiskey in the towel.
Would you like any of this stuff? Jordan. Nick. What? You want any?
No, I don't. I just remember that today is my birthday.
They drive off into the cooling twilight.
Tom drives in the car with Nick sitting in the passenger seat. Ahead of them is a line of 3 or 4 cars and a crowd.
Wreck, that's good. Wilson will have a little business at last.
He slows down, but still without any intention of stopping, until, as they come nearer, the hushed, intent faces of the people at the garage door make him automatically put on the brakes.
We'll take a look. Just a look.
Oh my God. What is that hollow, wailing sound from the garage?
Oh, there's some bad trouble.
He reaches up on tiptoes and peers over a circle of heads into the garage. Then he makes a harsh sound in his throat, and with a violent, thrusting movement of his powerful arms, pushes his way through. Myrtle Wilson's body, wrapped in a blanket, as though she suffered from a chill in the hot night, lays on a work table by the wall. Tom bends over it, motionless.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
Tom lifts his head with a jerk, and, after staring around the garage with his glazed eyes...
What happened?
Otto hit her, instantly killed.
Instantly killed.
She ran out in the road. Son of a bitch didn't even stop his car. There were 2 cars. One was coming, one was going, see? One was going each way. Well, she ran out, and the one that was coming from New York knocked her right into her, going 30 or 40 miles an hour. It was a yellow car, big yellow car.
You don't have to tell me what kind of car it was. I know what kind of car it was.
Tom walks quickly over to Wilson and seizes him by his arms.
You've got to pull yourself together. Listen, I just got here a minute ago from New York. I was bringing you that coupe we've been talking about. That yellow car I was driving this afternoon wasn't mine. Do you hear? I haven't seen it all afternoon.
Wait, what's all that?
I'm a friend of his. He says he knows the car that did it. It was a yellow car.
And what color's your car?
It was a blue car, a coupe.
You come straight from New York. So.
The policeman turns away, picking up Wilson like a doll. Tom carries him into the office, sits him down in a chair, and comes back.
If somebody will come here and sit with him!
2 men standing close glance at each other and go unwillingly into the room.
Let's get out.
He pushes through the still gathering crowd, passing a hurried doctor.
Tom drove slowly until we were beyond the bend. His foot came down hard and the coupe raced along through the night. In a little while, I heard a low, husky sob and saw that the tears were overflowing down his face.
Goddamn coward. He didn't even stop his car.
Exterior, Buchanan Mansion, night. The Buchanan's house floats toward Nick and Tom through the dark, rustling trees. Tom stops beside the porch and looks up at the second floor, where 2 windows bloomed with light among the vines.
Daisy's home. I ought to have dropped you in West Egg, Nick. There's nothing we can do tonight. I'll telephone for a taxi to take you home, and while you're waiting, you and Jordan better go in the kitchen and have them get you some supper, if you want any.
He opens the door for Nick to follow.
Come in.
No thanks. But I'd be glad if you'd order me the taxi. I'll wait outside.
Won't you come in, Nick?
No thanks.
It's only 9:30.
No. I'd be damned if I'd go in. I'd had enough of all of them for one day, and suddenly that included Jordan, too.
Jordan turns abruptly away and runs up the porch steps into the house. Nick sits down with his head in his hands until he hears the phone taken up inside and the butler's voice calling a taxi. He then walks slowly down the drive, away from the house to wait by the gate. Gatsby steps from between 2 bushes into the path.
What are you doing?
Just standing here, old sport. Did you see any troubles on the road?
Yes.
Was she killed?
Yes.
I thought so. I told Daisy I thought so. It's better that the shock should come all at once. She stood it pretty well.
He spoke as if Daisy's reaction was the only thing that mattered.
I got the West Egg by a side road and left the car in my garage. I don't think anybody saw us, but of course, I can't be sure.
I disliked him so much by this time that I didn't find it necessary to tell him he was wrong.
Who was the woman?
Her name was Wilson. Her husband owns the garage. How the devil did it happen?
Well, I tried to swing the wheel.
Was Daisy driving?
Yes, but of course I'll say that I was. You see, when we left New York, she was very nervous, and she thought that it would steady her to drive. And then this woman rushed out at us just as we were passing a car coming the other way. It all happened in a minute, but it seemed to me that she wanted to speak to us. Thought we were somebody she knew. Well, first Daisy turned away from the woman toward the other car, and then she lost her nerve and turned back. The second my hand reached the wheel, I felt the shock. It must have killed her instantly.
It ripped her
Don't
open.
tell me that, old sport. Anyhow, Daisy stepped on it. I tried to make her stop, but she couldn't, so I pulled on the emergency brake. And then she fell over into my lap, and I drove on. She'll be all right tomorrow. I'm just going to wait here and see if he tries to bother her about that unpleasantness this afternoon. She's locked herself into her room, and if he tries any brutality, she's going to turn the light out and on again.
He won't touch her. He's not thinking about her.
I don't trust him, old sport.
How long? How long are you going to wait?
All night. If necessary. Anyhow, till they all go to bed.
You wait here. I'll see if there's any sign of a commotion.
Nick walks back along the border of the lawn and tiptoes up the veranda steps. He looks through a window. Exterior, Buchanan Mansion, night.
Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table, with a plate of cold fried chicken between them and 2 bottles of ale. He was talking intently across the table at her, and in his earnestness his hand had fallen upon and covered her own. Once in a while, she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy. Neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale. And yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said that they were conspiring together.
Nick tiptoes from the porch. He hears the taxi feel its way along the dark road toward the house. Exterior, driveway, Buchanan Mansion, at night. Gatsby waits where he had left him in the drive.
Is it all quiet up there?
Yes. It's all quiet. You better come home. Get some sleep.
No. I want to wait here till Daisy goes to bed. Good night, old sport.
Chapter 8.
I couldn't sleep all night. And immediately I jumped out of bed and began to dress. I felt that I had something to tell him, something to warn him about. And morning would be too late. Crossing his lawn, I saw that his front door was still open, and he was leaning against the table in the hall, heavy with dejection or sleep.
Nothing happened. I waited. And about 4 o'clock, she came to the window and stood there for a minute. And then she turned out the light.
You have to go away. It's pretty certain they'll trace your car.
Go away now, old sport?
Go to Atlantic City for a week, or up to Montreal.
I cannot even consider that. Daisy was the first nice girl I had ever known. In various unrevealed capacities, I had come in contact with such people as her, but always with indiscernible barbed wire between us. She was excitingly desirable. I went to her house, at first with other officers from Camp Taylor, then alone. It amazed me. I had never been in such a beautiful house before. But what gave it an air of breathless intensity was that Daisy lived there. It excited me too in a way that many men had already loved Daisy. It increased her value in my eyes. I felt their presence all about the house, pervading the air with shades and echoes of still vibrant emotions. But I knew that I was in Daisy's house by a colossal accident, However glorious might be my future as Jay Gatsby, I was at present a penniless young man without a past, and at any moment the invisible cloak of my uniform might slip from my shoulders. So I made the most of his time. I took what I could get. Eventually, I took Daisy one still October night, and I took her because I had no real right to touch her hand. I'd deliberately given Daisy a sense of security. I let her believe that I was a person from much the same stratum as herself, that I was fully able to take care of her. And as a matter of fact, I had no such facilities. I had no comfortable family standing behind me. And he was liable at the whim of an impersonal government to be blown anywhere about the world. I knew that Daisy was extraordinary, but I didn't realize just how extraordinary a nice girl could be. She vanished into a rich house, into a rich, full life, leaving me nothing. And I felt married to her. That was all. And when we met again 2 days later, it was me who was breathless, who was somehow betrayed. Her porch was bright with the bought luxury of starshine, and as she turned towards me, I kissed her curious and lovely mouth. She'd caught a cold, and it made her voice huskier and more charming than ever, and I was overwhelmingly aware of the youth and mystery that wealth imprisons and preserves, of the freshness of many clothes, and of Daisy, gleaming like silver, safe and proud above the hot struggles of the poor. I can't describe to you how surprised I was to find out that I loved her, old sport. I did extraordinarily well in the war. I was a captain before I went to the front. After the armistice, I tried frantically to get home, but some complication or misunderstanding sent me to Oxford instead. And I was worried. There was a quality of nervous despair in Daisy's letters.
She didn't see why you couldn't come. She was feeling the pressure of the world outside, and she wanted to see you and feel your presence beside her and be reassured that she was doing the right thing after all. A force took shape in the middle of spring with the arrival of Tom Buchanan.
I don't think she ever loved him. You must remember, old sport, she was very excited this afternoon. He told her those things in a way that frightened her, that made it look as if I was some kind of cheap sharper, and the result was she hardly knew what she was saying. Of course, she might have loved him just for a minute when they were first married, and loved me even more then. Do you see? In any case, it was just personal. So anyways, after she married, I spent a year as a clam digger until an instinct led me to a Lutheran college in southern Minnesota. But after 2 weeks, the janitor's work dragged, and I went to the docks only to find Dan Cody anchoring his yacht on the shore. Cody was 50 years old then. It was due to Cody that I drank so little, for he formed the habit of leaving liquor alone. And it was from Cody that I inherited my money, a legacy of $25,000. But I do not understand the legal device used against me, as what remained of the millions went to a Miss Ella Kay, a lover who was with him the week before his premature death. I was left with my education.
I'm going to drain the pool today, Mr. Gatsby. Leaves will start falling pretty soon, and then there's always trouble with the pipes.
Don't do it today. You know, old sport, I've never used that pool all summer.
12 minutes to my train. The truth is, I've already missed my train 2 times because I don't want to leave. I'll call you up.
Do, old sport. I suppose Daisy will call too.
I suppose so.
Well, goodbye.
They're a rotten crowd. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together. I've always been glad I said that. It was the only compliment I ever gave him because I disapproved of him from beginning to end. First, he nodded politely, and then his face broke into that radiant and understanding smile, as if we'd been in ecstatic cahoots on that fact all the time, and he had stood on those steps, concealing his incorruptible dream as he waved them goodbye.
Interior, George's office, day.
How long have you been married, George? Oh, come on there. Try and sit still a minute and answer my question. How long have you been married?
12 years.
Ever had any children? Come on, George, sit still. I asked you a question. Did you ever have any children? Have you got a church you can go to sometimes, George? Maybe even if you haven't been there in a long time? Maybe I could call up on a church and get a priest to come over and he could talk to you, see?
Don't belong to any.
Well, you ought to belong to a church, George, for times like this. You must have gone to a church once. Didn't you just get married in a church? Listen, George. Hey. Listen to me. Didn't you get married in a church?
That was a long time ago.
Well, look. Look in the drawer there. A small, expensive dog leash made of leather and braided silver. How did you get a dog? Hey, I'm just trying to talk, George. Right? Did your wife buy you that?
Oh my God! He murdered her!
It was an accident, George.
I'm one of these trusting fellows, and I don't think any harm to nobody. But when I get to know a thing, I know it. It was the man in that car. She ran out to speak to him, and he wouldn't stop. I spoke to her. I told her she might fool me, but she couldn't fool God. I told her to the window, and I said, God knows what you've been doing. Everything you've been doing, you may fool me, but you can't fool God. God sees everything.
That's an advertisement.
Michaelis went home to sleep. When he awoke 4 hours later and hurried back to the garage, Wilson was gone. His movements, he was on foot all the time, were afterward traced to Fort Roosevelt, and then to Gad's Hill, where he bought a sandwich that he didn't eat and a cup of coffee. He must have been tired and walking slowly, for he didn't reach us until noon. Thus far, there was no difficulty in accounting for his time. There were boys who had seen a man acting sort of crazy. He spent that time going from garage to garage, thereabout inquiring for a yellow car. By 2:30, he was in West Egg, where he asked someone the way to Gatsby's house. So by that time, he knew Gatsby's name. At 2 o'clock, Gatsby put on his bathing suit and left word with the butler that if anyone phoned, word was to be brought to him at the pool. The chauffeur heard the shots. There was a faint, barely perceptible movement, a revolving thin red circle in the water. Perhaps Gatsby no longer cared. If that was true, he must have felt that he had lost the old warm world, paid a price for living too long with a single dream. It was after he started toward the house that the gardener saw Wilson's body a little way off in the grass, and the Holocaust was complete.
Chapter 9.
After 2 years, I remember the rest of that day and that night and the next day only as an endless drill of police and photographers and newspaper men in and out of Gatsby's front door. Someone with a positive manner, perhaps a detective, used the expression madman as he bent over Wilson's body that afternoon, and the adventitious authority of his voice set the key for the newspaper reports next morning. Most of those reports were a nightmare, grotesque, circumstantial, eager, and untrue. I found myself on Gatsby's side, and alone. I was responsible, because no one else was interested. Interested, I mean, with that intense personal interest to which everyone has some vague right at the end. I called up Daisy half an hour after we found him. Called her instinctively and without hesitation. But she and Tom had gone away early that afternoon, taking baggage with them. I think it was on the third day that a telegram signed Henry C. Gatz arrived from a town in Minnesota. It said only that the sender was leaving immediately and to postpone the funeral until he came. It was Gatsby's father, a solemn old man, very helpless and dismayed, bundled up in a long, cheap ulster against the warm September day. His eyes leaked continuously with excitement, and when I took the bag and umbrella from his hands, he was on the point of collapse. So I took him into the music room and made him sit down while I sent for something to eat. He wouldn't eat. And the glass of milk spilled from his trembling hand.
I saw it in the Chicago newspaper. It was all in the Chicago newspaper. It started right away. I didn't know how to reach you. It was a madman. He must have been mad. I don't want anything. I'm all right now. Mr.
Caraway.
Caraway. Well, I'm all right now. Where have they got Jimmy?
I didn't know what you'd want, Mr. Gatsby.
Gats is my name.
Mr. Gats, I thought you might want to take the body west.
Mm-mm. Jimmy always liked it better down east. He rose up to his position in the east. Were you a friend of my boys, Mr.
We were close friends.
Please tell me the name of who I'm speaking with.
This is Mr. Caraway.
This is Clipspringer, the pianist.
The funeral's tomorrow, 3 o'clock, here at the house. I wish you'd tell anybody who'd be interested.
What I called up about was a pair of shoes I left there. I wondered if it'd be too much trouble to have the butler send them on. You see, they're tennis shoes, and I'm sort of helpless without them. My address is care of BF.
I didn't hear the rest of the name because I hung up the receiver. And so I went to Mayor Wolfsheim to see if he would support Gatsby to the end.
Would you like a cigar? My memory goes back to when I first met him. A young major just out of the army and covered over with medals he'd got in the war. He was so hard up he had to keep on wearing his uniform because he couldn't buy some regular clothes. First time I saw him was when he come into Windbrenner's spool room at 43rd Street and asked for a job. He hadn't eaten anything for a couple of days. Come on, have some lunch with me, I said. He ate more than $4 worth of food, all in half an hour.
Did you start him in the business?
Start him? I made him. I raised him out of nothing, right out of the gutter. I saw right away he was a fine-appearing, gentlemanly young man. And when he told me he was at Oxford, I knew I could use him good. I got him to join up in the American Legion, and he used to stand high there, right off. He did some work for a client of mine up to Albany. We were so thick like that and everything, always together.
Well, now he's dead. You were his closest friends, so I know you'll want to come to his funeral this afternoon.
I'd like to come.
Come, then.
I can't do it. I can't get mixed up in it. When a man gets killed, I can't get mixed up in it in any way. I keep out. When I was a young man, it was different. If a friend of mine died, no matter how, I stuck with them to the end. You may think that's sentimental, but I mean it. To the bitter end. Let us learn to show our friendship for a man when he is alive, and not after he is dead. After that, my own rule is to let everything alone.
And so I returned back to the mansion to attend the funeral with the only apparent visitor, Mr. Gats.
Jimmy sent me this picture. Look there.
There's a photograph of the house, cracked in the corners and dirty with many hands. He pointed out every detail to me eagerly.
Come out to see me 2 years ago and bought me this house I live in now. He was broke up when he ran off from home. But I see now there was a reason for it. He knew he had a big future in front of him. And ever since he had made a success, he was very generous to me.
His eyes began to blink anxiously. And he spoke of the rain in a worried, uncertain way. The minister glanced several times at his watch, so I took him aside and asked him to wait for half an hour. But it wasn't any use. Nobody came. I tried to think about Gatsby then for a moment, but he was already too far. And I could only remember without resentment that Daisy hadn't sent a message or a flower. Dimly, I heard someone murmur.
Blessed are the dead that the rain falls on. Amen to that. I couldn't get to the house. Neither could anybody else. Go on. Why, my God, they used to go there by the hundreds.
He took off his glasses and wiped them again, outside and in. The poor son of a bitch. After Gatsby's death, the East was haunted for me like that. Distorted beyond my eyes' power of correction. So, when the blue smoke of brittle leaves was in the air and the wind blew the wet laundry stiff on the line, I decided to come back home. Jordan, I'm heading back to the West.
Oh, well, I'm engaged to another man.
I doubted that. Though there were several she could have married at a nod of her head, but I pretended to be surprised. For just a minute, I wondered if I wasn't making a mistake. Then I thought it all over again, quickly got up to say goodbye.
Nevertheless, you did throw me over. You threw me over on the telephone. I don't give a damn about you now, but it was a new experience for me. And I felt a little dizzy for a while. And do you remember a conversation we had once about driving a car?
Not exactly.
You said a bad driver was only safe until she met another bad driver. Well, I met another bad driver, didn't I? I mean, it was careless of me to make such a wrong guess. I thought you were rather an honest, straightforward person. I thought it was your secret pride.
I'm too old to lie to myself and call it honor. She didn't answer. One afternoon, late in October, I saw Tom Buchanan. He was walking ahead of me along Fifth Avenue in his alert, aggressive way.
What's the matter, Nick? You object to shaking hands with me?
Yes. You know what I think of you.
You're crazy, Nick. Crazy as hell. I don't know what's the matter with you.
Tom, what did you say to Wilson that afternoon?
I told him the truth. Came to the door while we were getting ready to leave. And when I sent down word that we weren't in, he tried to force his way upstairs. He was crazy enough to kill me if I hadn't told him who owned the car. His hand was on a revolver in his pocket every minute he was in the house. What if I did tell him? That fellow had it coming to him. He threw dust into your eyes just like he did in Daisy's. But he was a tough one. He ran over Myrtle like he'd run over a dog and never even stopped his car.
That is not true.
If you didn't think that I had my share of suffering, look here. When I went to give up that flat and saw that damn box of dog biscuits sitting there on the sideboard, I sat down and I cried like a baby. By God, it was awful.
I couldn't forgive him or like him, but I saw that what he had done was to him entirely justified. It was all very careless and confused. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money and their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess that they had made. Gatsby's house was still empty when I left. The grass on his lawn had grown as long as mine. I spent my Saturday nights in New York because those gleaming, dazzling parties of his were with me so vividly that I could still hear the music and the laughter, faint and incessant, from his garden and the cars going up and down his driveway. On the last night, with my trunk packed and my car sold to the grocer, I went over and I looked at that huge, incoherent failure of a house once more. On the white steps, an obscene word scrawled by some boy with a piece of brick stood out clear in the moonlight. And I erased it, drawing my shoe raspingly along the stone. Then I wandered down to the beach and sprawled out on the sand. And as I sat there brooding on the old, unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder. When he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock, he had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed just so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him. Somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the sea where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. Sure, it eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past.
The end.
Thank you for watching The Great Gatsby. We hope that you enjoyed your time watching the play and also donated to the nonprofit we're supporting, AMFAR. AMFAR is a charity that was founded in 1985 and is dedicated to curing AIDS and has done tireless work. You can read all about them at actingforacause.org. Please don't forget to donate by visiting actingforacause.org, and we hope you enjoyed The Great Gatsby.